If you have a lot of unexplained gut symptoms, you may have been on Dr. Google and you may be seeing terms like IBS and IBD and just wondering what the difference is between the two. I'm going to, in this video, clear that up for you to give you the symptoms of each, what the differences are, and also using a functional medicine approach, just to give you a bit of an idea of how you can tackle these kind of conditions. I'm Carmela and I'm a nutritional therapist. My goal with these videos is to really give you the correct information, but also to give you some hope and optimism that you can overcome the symptoms of these kind of conditions. It's just a matter of finding out actually what's happening and correcting things right from the root causes. At the end, I'll give you a discount if you want to consult with me for a nutrition plan, or if you want to use some of the supplements that I have on my shop. So stick around to the end. So starting with IBS, and that's something many people have heard of, and it's incredibly common now, and that stands for irritable bowel syndrome. And typical symptoms: bloating, chronic diarrhea or constipation, switching between the two, sometimes gut pain, nausea, that kind of thing. But IBS is what they call a functional disorder because, sorry, that's the train, because you can't, if you were to go and get a colonoscopy or endoscopy, you would not be able to see any difference. The tissue would look healthy, but there are functional issues why you're having problems. So problems can be related to the nervous system and kind of a breakdown between the gut and the brain. As a good example, if your motility shuts down, that's all related to vagal tone, the vagus nerve, which lots of people have heard about. And then, that affects motility, as I've said, and that's where you can get chronic constipation, diarrhea. You get bacteria starting to just stagnate in your intestines instead of being swept through by muscular contractions. And that's where you can get things like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which sometimes is definitely a factor in IBS. IBD, on the other hand, which stands for inflammatory bowel disease, and that includes two specific diseases. One's called Crohn's disease and one is ulcerative colitis. And again, you get all those kind of symptoms: bloating, mainly lots and lots of diarrhea. And one of the distinguishing factors is very explosive diarrhea. And that can be really quite different to IBS. And you can experience that many times every day, it's like 6, 7 or more times a day. So it's very debilitating. And that is more, like the name suggests, an inflammatory disease. And it's what they call an immune-mediated disease, which is different to autoimmunity. And it's where your immune system is actually attacking bacteria that naturally resides in the gut lining. And basically your gut lining, it just ends up being collateral damage. And that's where you get all that inflammation, and you get a lot of damage to what they call the mucosa, which is the layer that's lining the gut. So with Crohn's, that happens. That can happen anywhere. There go the kookaburras. With Crohn's, that can happen anywhere in the digestive system, and ulcerative colitis is much more localized. So I won't go into all the nuances of that because it would make the video a bit too long. So what's important to pay attention to is what we call red flags. So things that are important, like particular symptoms that you want to watch out for, especially when it comes to inflammatory bowel disease. And you definitely have to go and see the doctor and get a proper diagnosis with that. With IBS, those symptoms, like I've said, can be a bit non-specific and quite variable for individuals because there's several different causes. And, like I said, it's bloating, constipation, diarrhea, nausea, sometimes reflux can be a factor. With IBD, Like I said, specifically, it's more explosive diarrhea that happens very frequently over the day. You can have low-grade fevers, weight loss, fatigue. It's just generally just a much more serious symptoms, more debilitating. So how do you know which one you've got? Well, with IBS, because it's more like a collection of symptoms, sometimes it's a little bit hard to really know what's going on. But really, the first port of call is to get a proper stool test. And here comes another train. You can get a comprehensive stool test done, which, I have the test kits available on my website. And those will be able to tell you whether you've got imbalance in your gut bacteria. They look at digestive function, and that can really give you a very good idea of what's going on there. And as I said, a lot of IBS conditions can be due to SIBO, and that's where you do a SIBO breath test. And again, I have those test kits on my website. With IBD, it's a bit more specific, and like I said, the red flag, blood in the stools, and also you can look for what's called inflammatory biomarkers, and those are just chemicals in the body that sort of signal there's inflammation going on. One of those is calprotectin, which happens in the gut, and you need a stool test to determine if your calprotectin levels are high. But if they're not high, that it's still not conclusive. And I've seen people who have normal calprotectin levels and they still have IBD. So it's one way of checking. You also need to get a blood test and measure CRP, which is another inflammatory biomarker. But the gold standard is to have proper work done by a gastroenterologist, a colonoscopy, endoscopy also. So now, what about approaches? And I've mentioned functional medicine approaches, and that's really where you're looking at root causes and you're looking at different systems in the body that might be contributing to your symptoms. So as part of that, the first thing to do is address diet. With IBS, I would use something like a low FODMAP diet, or more specifically, a SIBO diet, which it's a low FODMAP diet, but it's a little bit more restrictive. And that's something I would recommend doing something like that with a qualified, experienced practitioner such as myself, because you don't want to be in those diets for too long. So that diet's very appropriate for IBS, and should only be done for short term, like maybe 4 weeks maximum. With IBD, something like a paleo diet is useful, but it has to be very much emphasis on plant-based, as many plant foods you can get into your diet as possible. And that's really relevant when you're not having a flare-up, when you're just looking at repair and recovery and conditioning your gut so that you don't have so many flare-ups going forward. If you're having a flare-up, that's a different thing altogether, and you need a different approach. But something like a paleo diet, or some people use what's called a specific carbohydrate diet, which is a bit like the SIBO diet, but it's basically also cutting out specific food triggers, and that's a very individual thing that you have to try to do food diaries and work with the practitioner to find out what those are. And then in terms of actually addressing the symptoms, with IBS, if you have overgrowths, that will show up either a stool test or a SIBO breath test, then antimicrobials are the go-to. But you also need to prepare your gut for that kind of antimicrobial work. And I've done another video about that preparatory work, which I'll put a link to in the description box. So you need to do gut healing work with L-glutamine, and then you need to start building up your microbiome, rebalancing it, and quite often working on the nervous system, stress management strategies, and adaptogen herbs like ashwagandha, which help you to be more resilient to stress, which is always a factor in both IBS and IBD. So with IBD, the approach is very much about building up your mucosa, the mucosa lining. So gut healing again with something like L-glutamine, zinc L-carnosine, and also very much about supporting the immune system, rebalancing it. And there's lots of really good herbs around that can do that. Things like boswellia, turmeric is very important, and I would use that in supplement form in terms of really down regulating those inflammatory chemicals. Really super, super important. And also I would generally add butyrate to somebody's protocol, because butyrate is a byproduct that good bacteria produce, but you can actually take it as a supplement, and that helps to build a healthy terrain in your intestines, which means that your good bacteria can grow and thrive just like you would condition the soil in the garden, and that helps the plants to grow. And then also you can use probiotics, but not always. Sometimes it's better to just use things like butyrate, a good fiber that you can tolerate, such as PHGG. So that's a lot of information, and I have also done a little carousel post on Instagram that gives you more information about the protocol, which I'll put a link for that in the description box. But if you want more help, you can book a discovery call with me. That's free, 15, 20 minutes. And I can talk about how I can help you and what's the best approach for you. Or you can book a full consultation. So look on my website, which is in my my bio. And if you do book a discovery call with me or a consultation, then I will give you 10% off of that, and you can use that for the consultation fee, or you can use it for the supplements on my website. So I hope that's helpful. It's a bit of a romp, but it just hopefully gives you a bit of an idea of what can be done and what actually does help. It's all evidence-based, and so it gives you hope to know that there's lots that can be done. Thank you for listening.